Welcome to HeartChangeU live stream, where we hopefully are giving you a little bit of a different look. Having worked with addicts in many intense, difficult situations, it's our heartbeat to give you ideas of how to work with people, how to be effective and bring a difference to people's lives. Today, in this Valentine's Day edition, what are we going to talk about? Of course, we have to talk about love. And you might think, what could we possibly come up with today that might be unique in that area? But hopefully we'll be able to bring some things that will really be helpful to you in terms of working with people and bringing healthiness and life to the people around us. Today we have a very special guest with us. Oh, don't laugh. I mean, you're special. We have the doctor, you know.
Wow.
He is a professor at Central Christian College and really does bring a great deal of integrity and knowledge to the table. Charles, it's great to have you with us today.
Well, thank you, David. It's just a real privilege to be here. A little short notice. You you called or texted me this morning and said, "Could you help?" And I thought, "Okay, I'll try it." And I appreciate your invitation. Thank you very much.
You're as prepared as the rest of us.
There you go.
You're ready to go. They always give me a hard time saying that I actually do better when I don't know what's going on, because then I don't go crazy with details and information. And we have Heather with us today. It's great to have you on.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. And Matthew is back behind the screen to us today. We've kind of changed the studio to where he's kind of hidden from us, but you all can see him. I want to talk a little bit about love today. One of the verses that I tend to highlight, in fact, I wrote a series that I use for marriage counseling, and it ends up being a key verse, which is Matthew 6:21. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And from that, I've coined the idea of feelings follow. So much of the time, we actually want our feelings to lead us. I have someone who comes to me on a frequent basis saying, "Hey, would you marry me?" And a lot of times I'll toy with them a little bit and say, "Why should I marry you?" Well, of course, because we're in love. And when they say that they have this idea that love should be on the front end, and it should guide and it should direct. When I look at this verse, it says feelings follow. I mean, that's where I take that. Now, back up, you have this issue about the word heart. So we'll talk about that for just a moment. The idea of heart doesn't necessarily translate to feelings. And in fact, that's part of what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the difference between that soulish thing that goes on that is more emotional, and then there's a spiritual component that I believe is more reliable and is more significant. And just understanding the difference between those two pieces actually, I think, will be a little bit of uniqueness today as we talk about that. And in fact, this morning when I was teaching in class, I actually jumped back and forth between revival and something that I call revival chasers, and the way we do love in our culture, just to kind of highlight those differences. Heather, I'll just kind of jump. You were here this morning and you saw a class. Any thoughts in terms of what I presented this morning that struck you as I was talking about those two things?
Well, there were, a couple of the things that came to me as you were talking about it was about judgment. We did our last live stream was redeeming judgment, looking at how God has given us a faculty to judge what's going on with us. And we talked about the importance of recognizing what's happening spiritually, not just emotionally, mentally, and as someone who has specifically and strongly struggled in the area of romantic love, and it's caused me some of my greatest pain. When you were talking about the chasing of the emotion and the feeling of love that we're programmed from childhood to seek out by movies and TV and songs that we, and the whole "you complete me" and "I can't live without you" and all of these kinds of ideas that's what love equals. Really really struck home to me, that we're battling against not only the world that presents us with these ridiculous ideas and conceptions of love, but also our own flesh and our own desires to be the fairest one of them all, to use a fairy tale kind of thing. And so then I started thinking about Valentine's Day, and there are some myths about Saint Valentine. One of them being that he was martyred by losing his head. And I thought, isn't that appropriate? Right? Losing your head, your ability to reason, your ability. Yeah. And he also, another myth, which may or may not be true, is that he cured someone of a girl of blindness. And that whole love is blind thing. I remember talking to a mentor of mine after I'd been particularly blindsided in a relationship. And I said, I can't believe I can't believe I didn't see it. And she said, yeah, there's a reason why they say love is blind, because you can't see it. And she actually made a joke and said, if you could actually see the truth, the human race would have died out already. So it kind of works to our advantage a little bit, which to some degree, that's probably true. But just looking at that idea that when I get, whether it's in a revival or a spiritual intoxication kind of situation or a love romantic situation, I lose the ability to be fair-minded. I lose the ability to judge. I lose the ability to see. I lose my head.
Actually, when we're the most, and I'm going to use the word vulnerable, and I don't know that that's a good choice, but when we're the most vulnerable to love is when we're in a deficit situation. So rebound, let's just go there. Someone's in a rebound situation. They've had a toxic relationship. They've had a painful breakup. They're trying to get on. When you're in a rebound situation, you're in a deficit situation. You're in a need-based situation. And so often that's when we, quote unquote, fall in love. And the biblical example that I use with that is Jacob and Rebekah. He'd been through the whole deceiving thing where he had basically gotten his father to bless him instead of blessing Esau, and pretty much was run out of town and had been on a long journey, hadn't seen anyone, was really in an emotionally broken down deficit situation when he sees Rachel at that point. And as soon as he sees Rachel, it's instant mad love. And something else that I brought out that I think is true, if you look at Laban was a swindler on his own right. So there were all kinds of games being played there. There was not genuine love going on in that family. So my guess is Rachel, at the exact same time, she's in a deficit situation. And so you have these two people who are incredibly needy that they meet up. And yes, you've got the physical attraction, and so that becomes a part of it. But you have two people in a deficit situation, and it's instant love and emotions and going everywhere. That's a terrible basis for a relationship. Give you a chance to jump in. We both talk a lot.
That's okay. That's okay.
You better.
Oh, speak for yourself, Pastor.
I'll have to think of something.
Okay, I talk a lot.
But yeah, people lose their heads when they get married. I'm teaching, or when they fall in love. I'm teaching marriage and family this semester, and one of the things we just talked about a week or so ago was how so many of the classical writers and so forth talk about that very thing, that people just lose their lucid faculties. They don't think straight when they're in love, and it's unfortunate. But that's what we associate so many times, especially on St. Valentine's Day, perhaps. But love is so much more than that.
It's interesting. You and I were talking yesterday, and I was talking about the step-by-step series. And in the step-by-step series, we talk about the idea of safe, and then you get to belonging, and then you get to the idea of covering, and you walk it all the way up. And yesterday, I mentioned the last step on the layer I call committing. Now, you could call it all kinds of different things. You could call it mission. But the idea of committing, that highest level of maturity, is when I'm no longer in a deficit situation, which is where romantic love comes from. It's like I'm in a deficit situation, and I'm desperate for something, and you fill that up and you make me feel full. And again, when you have someone who's in that kind of a setting and somebody comes along that seemingly is filling that up, any suggestion that this might not be the perfect relationship of all relationships, that's just fantastic, you get in the middle of that thing, you got two freight trains ready to collide. I mean, it's just it's ugly, because people, when you're in a deficit, you're staggering and you're struggling. Well, Healthy Love, actually, that step-by-step series takes it all the way to this, and I hadn't actually talked about in that series, so when you said that was like, wow, he's absolutely right. You're not capable of loving in the biblical sense until you've walked all the way through the maturity process, and you're able to look at someone and you're able to make that long-term commitment, not out of a deficit situation. Because if that's where you are, as soon as you're no longer being filled, as soon as you're no longer being loved and being nurtured, etc., you're done. If your excuse for getting married is we're in love, what's your excuse for divorce? We're out of love. We're done. Yeah. So if you think about that ends up being incredibly dangerous. The only Our apologies for the internet issues. We dropped out. Before that, and to be honest, I don't know exactly where we dropped out, so I don't know how far back to retrack on what I was saying. But the idea, so much of the time, we start love on the basis of neediness. So here I am, I'm struggling with who I am. I haven't gotten to a level of being able to commit to other people, being able to give. I believe that because I'm madly in love, and because I'm madly in love, of course, I'm going to go there, and I'm going to go there forever. We don't believe that we're not ready for love, but there's a maturing process that needs to happen, ending at that place of commitment, ending at that place of, I really am ready to follow through on the things. And if you go back to the verse that I brought up, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. A lot of times people come to me and they're like, again, I'm not in love anymore, so it's time for a divorce. What I tell them in that first step of marriage counseling that I do is, if you're not in love, it has nothing to do with the other person. It has everything to do with your behavior. It doesn't say when the other person treats me badly, I'll fall out of love. It says when I stop sowing. When I stop giving input, when I stop laying down my life, I stop loving. It's personal. When you stop sowing, when you stop investing, you stop loving. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It doesn't say anything in that verse about how the other person's treating you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, David, there's a lot of theories of love, and I usually have PowerPoint so I can look up on the wall and read things, and I'm not working from that foundation here. So you're testing me, but I don't remember who wrote it, but one of the theories of love is that we fall in love with people that we perceive will meet our needs, whatever those needs are. And we have all kinds of needs, emotional needs and sexual needs and so forth. And of course, I don't know if you're going to get there or not, but one of the things that I always think about when we talk about love is that, in the American English language, we just have the one word, agape, or love, which means so many different things. But in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, you have such a more rich vocabulary concerning what love really is, and a full-orbed love is complete in eros, the passion, a lot of times sexual desire, but also philia, the brotherhood love, storge, which is kind of a parenting, taking care of you when you're sick love, and then agape, of course, which is was where the commitment comes in, and agape is a commitment to somebody else's needs, and it's not at all about me. It's about what the other person needs and what I've committed myself to do on behalf of the other person. So it's really like, I was just telling my class the other day, and I don't know if it ever hit me so strongly as it did this year, but the eros and agape are really opposites. Because, eros says, make me feel good, and I need you because I want you to make me feel good and fulfill those desires that I have and everything. And agape says, it's not about me, it's about you. It's about me taking care of your needs. And it's like we fall in love because of the eros kind of thing, or the philia, that we want a deep friendship, we want intimacy, that kind of intimacy. And yet it's really the opposite of what agape is. Sternberg has a theory that I really like, and it's a triangular theory of love. If I may keep going here.
Yeah. Oh, you're great. I'm loving it. You were telling us you weren't prepared, and then you're jumping in like you had it all memorized. So I'm impressed.
I did write 3 or 4 lines of notes here, but Sternberg has a what he calls a triangular theory of love, and it's like a triangle. That's what triangular means, and one side is eros, or he calls it passion. It's the I am in love with you. The other side is another side is do I have it written down? I can remember it. Intimacy, which is like the philia kind of, it's shared interest. I can talk to you. You help me work through issues, so it's a real personal, not sexual intimacy, but relational intimacy. And then the third side is commitment. And so, and these correspond. I don't know if he ever thought about this, but these correspond to eros and philia and agape, And it's interesting, he has names for, like, if all you have is passion, I don't know the names for them, but if all you have is passion, then he calls that one kind of love. And if all you have is intimacy, then it's another kind of love. And if all you have is commitment, then it's another kind of love. And if you have 2 of them but not one, then he has another name for that. Okay, but when you have all 3 and they're in balance, and of course you can have a triangle that's out of balance. You have more passion and more commitment, but not very much intimacy. And it just really helps to look at that and say, okay, this is where my relationship is weak, and where I need to work on. But if you have all 3 in balance, it's called consummate love. And that's where we want to be, that, yeah, it's nice to have passion. It's nice to have, you want the intimacy, but the commitment is what really makes things last. In fact, it's interesting. I'm trying to remember now. I think there was one study that was done of like 3,000 marriages or something, and some of them stay married and some of them got divorced, and they discovered that the one thing that made a difference was commitment. And it wasn't even commitment to the person so much as commitment to the marriage. I'm not going to let this thing dissolve. Even though I'm mad at the other person, I'm not going to give up on the relationship. It's right before God. It's right to the other person. I said that I would be faithful. I'm going to be faithful.
That's incredibly powerful. When I think about my marriage, and I feel like we have a great marriage, my wife and I'm kind of enjoyed this, obviously, but it's a lot of times people in the program are like, "Oh, it's so cute," And I actually shared this story this morning too. That last few years we were at Applebee's, and I was reaching across the table, and we were holding hands across the table, and and the waitress is like, "Oh, how long have you been married?" And it kind of hit me at the moment. She was thinking that we were newlyweds. In fact, she actually said that a little bit after I'd say, I don't remember at that time, it was 38, 39, 40, whatever it was in terms of number of years. And she kind of like, "Oh, you're old marrieds and you're still in love with each other." So it's neat to have that kind of relationship and to enjoy that. But I was also sharing part of what makes it work is the differentness and the differences between us sometimes make marriage very hard. My wife frequently tells me, said, "You better love me because nobody else would have stayed married to you after all you put me through." And man, there's a lot of truth to that.
There's a lot of truth to that.
I mean, I have lived, I'm going to call it an apostolic lifestyle, and what I mean by that is I've launched new ministries pretty much my entire life. Well, when you're in ministry launch situations, it's not good financially. It's not good from a work energy standpoint. I mean, you're running 15 directions at one time, and the vast majority of my life, I've worked 2 jobs, and working 2 jobs, I've made half to 2/3 of what she makes. So it's kind of like she's been the chief breadwinner, and she's been put through a lot in our marriage, and so there's a lot of truth there in terms of not very many women would have put up with what you put me through. And so she's had to have this incredible commitment, this incredible sacrifice on her part. And on my end, man, I recognize that. And so I value that. I treasure that. I don't take that for granted. But I was also sharing where, again, my workaholic nature, there's a part of me that sometimes wants to come home and she's going to be excited about my work and we're going to talk scriptures and we're just going to do all of this. And what I know and what I understand, if she was that kind of a person, I would never stop. And I would continually be basically in burnout. I might not even be sane today. I mean, but because God has made her to where she's over here in the feeling, emotional side, all of the teaching stuff, all this stuff that I do here right now is kind of like, oh, that's nice. and it would be easy for me to get offended at that. But one of the things that I saw early on is I need that. I need that. That is a gift to me so that when we sit down, it's us. It's relationship time. It's not me continuing to work. There have been points, especially earlier in the marriage, where that easily was starting to build as an offense, and I had to step back and look at that and go, no, this is who God has called. We are a team together. We work together. And a lot of times we don't go there. You know, we don't understand the differences, the compliments. We want someone that's going to make us feel good. And at a natural level, I would feel good if she was entering in and, oh, that teaching was so wonderful and fantastic. And it's funny, again, just back to the pastor, you might be able to relate to this, I don't know. But it's like you come out of a sermon and it's kind of like, well, how was it, dear? Oh, it's nice. Nice. Come on, give me something here. Help me out here, you know?
Yeah.
And somewhere along the line, I had to learn that, okay, this is not Kelly. Let's go. If you want good feedback, go somewhere else. But these are the kind of practical things and real things that we don't think of in terms of love, where commitment to the marriage, commitment to partnership, commitment to something bigger than myself, all of that ends up being incredibly important. You're writing notes. Are you ready to jump in?
I'm about ready to jump in again.
All right.
A couple of things you talked to me about when you were talking, I thought about the fact that historically, and I still kind of struggle with this, because today, you know, the romantic love is so central to what we think about in terms of love. And yet, supposedly, for a lot of history, most of history, marriage has been more about needs, economic necessity. You know, women they couldn't live without a man pretty much because they weren't allowed to own property much of the time. They weren't allowed to get educated, and they had children they had to take care of probably, and so women needed a man for economic reasons. A man needed a woman to take care of his children and to do the things he couldn't do while he was out earning a living, and of course he wanted a sexual partner too. And so it was really more about necessity rather than romantic love. And I think the emphasis on romantic love has really added to the stress of modern marriage because, when we fall out of love, then what's going to keep the relationship together? Another weakness here is that even kind of like you were talking, David, about wanting your wife to tell you how great you are and want to talk about the things you want to talk about is the that's philia. It's the friendship part and intimacy part, but again, we have these expectations that we're going to marry our best friend, and sometimes that doesn't. It puts a great deal of stress and expectations on the marriage. I remember reading about some woman who was talking about her grandparents and how they had a very stable married relationship. And yet she said, if you had asked my grandmother if her husband, my grandfather, was her best friend, she would have laughed at you. It's just, there really are different expectations that put a tremendous amount of pressure on modern day marriages.
Let me jump back to the topic that I started in, where I talked about so often relationships start out a deficit. Mm-hmm. So I've got this hole, mm-hmm. and a lot of times when there's that immediate emotional filling of that hole, so now that's an expectation, the romance that's put in there. Yeah. So I have that expectation put on. And there's almost always an expectation that is going to continue. And so whenever that drops off, now not only do I have to deal with the fact that it dropped off, but I have to deal with the expectations that were there. So I've got the disappointment of expectations. I've got the fact that it dropped off. And most of the time, I still have the same deficit, because romance will not fill that deficit. It'll temporarily do it, and that's part of, I referenced this earlier in the program and spent actually quite a bit of time on it this morning. When emotions are the core, they're going to go up, they're going to go down, but we will be disappointed. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to have long-term strength in my spiritual walk with God, it cannot be based on emotions. It's got to be based on spirit-to-spirit connection. Same thing is true at the level with a couple, and a lot of times it really doesn't ever happen. There's a spiritual dynamic there, that when that spiritual dynamic is happening the way it's supposed to be happening, it completely changes this whole piece. I talk about a lot, you can't give away what you don't have. Mm-hmm. And at the spiritual level, it's not necessarily emotions. I believe at the spiritual level, it's actually worth. And I talk about this a lot in addiction circles. If I could just crack your skull open and take a picture and pour some self-worth in there. And again, I don't like the word self there. I'd probably just stay with worth. But pour worth in there. And then put it back up and put you back together. When I'm no longer in a deficit situation, you can't give away what you don't have. So if I haven't received some affirmation from God, then I have nothing to give. And this goes back to when we were talking about the step-by-step series. The fourth step on the step-by-step series is a combination of exploration and celebration. And it's pictured with the toddlers. The toddlers are called toddlers because they fall down a lot. Take a few steps, they fall down. And when they fall down, what do? Yay, good job, you took a few steps. We go through that celebration. So there's exploration, there's falling down, there's celebration. What's interesting to me, after that exploration celebration step comes the ability to focus. And the ability to focus, frankly, is pivotal until I start being able to see God, until I start being able to see something beyond my selfish person. I haven't even begun towards maturity. And that's the same thing that's going on. So we have romantic love that comes out of, I'm temporarily, if you think of that little child who's being celebrated, if that child sticks in that place where the only time he's able to do anything is when he's being celebrated, we got a problem. Mm-hmm. But at some point, that child needs to move from there to being able to get outside of self, to focus. Basically, developmentally, if you understand developmental psychology, they move from concrete thinking to abstract thinking. All of a sudden, now I'm able to start seeing other people. When I start seeing other people, whoa, I hurt you. My words impacted you. That's the humanization. That actually starts. So many people in romantic love are caught back here in stage 4, where they're still a toddler, in deficit, not feeling good about themselves, not able to even begin to look outside of themselves. I mean, this is what we do with romantic love. We freeze people in stage 4, toddlerville, of if you're getting rewarded the way you want, then you just stay there, instead of going on to stage 5 and then stage 6, which is genuine caring, and then you get into stage 7. You know, what I see in terms of spiritual development, you don't even start developing integrity until after you start seeing the pain you bring other people. You think about that. All other integrity at that point, I'm still back here at a selfish level of, oh, if I say this to you, you'll hit me. Well, okay, I'll stop saying that to you. I haven't learned morals yet. I've just learned that I don't like to be hit. So until I get outside of that, and I'm over here on stage 6 where I'm starting to go, whoa, my words actually hurt you.
Yeah.
Then I get into integrity. Then I get into influencing. And then the final step, which we talked about yesterday, is commitment, where all of a sudden I'm not being knocked around by my needs. I'm not coming out of deficit. I'm not coming out of this hole that I'm living out of. Now I'm able to make commitments. I'm able to choose. I'm able to step in. Now we're talking a much deeper, different kind of love than we see almost anybody. Heather, you want to jump in there? You've been quiet for too long. It makes me nervous.
Because I'm just about to. So I don't know. I hear what you're saying. I can't disagree with any of it. I do think that for the average person, the arrow starts working way before physically. Our flesh is awakened, our lust is awakened
that's right.
at a very early age. And so unless I am being raised in a household that talks to me about the necessity for death to self, for death to the flesh, for and that has been misused. Don't get me wrong. People have been shamed for their sexuality. I think that's why our culture has gotten so far away from
You're probably right.
telling, because people took it to an extreme. I think about some of the more extreme religious sects that really make people feel ashamed for what's happening to them very naturally within their own physical body. So we've just flipped to the other side, where now we're, as a culture, not as a Christian culture, hopefully not all of us anyway, where we're telling kids, you just need to do what you feel. Oh, well, you feel like you're a boy today? Okay, be a boy today. You feel like you want to kiss a girl today? Okay, do that. So, we've just gone way far off the rails, but without a biblical framework to help guide children into saying, no, your body's going to awaken in these ways. These things are natural. These things are going to happen. It's not because you're bad. It is because we're fallen. And we have this fallen world that we live in where these things come up and we don't know what to do with them. So God gave you that so that when he is ready for you to go find your Rachel, Leah, I like Isaac and Rebecca more. I think that was more of a God-ordained type of situation, obviously. But when God is ready for that, your commitment is there, So while I think that psychologically what you're talking about, absolutely, these stages of development are necessary, I also think if we don't if we don't address the fact that we have a sin nature that's working against us, not anything to be ashamed of. We all have it, every single one of us. Right. And then also that part of our Christian journey, our spiritual development, is about dying to those things within ourselves. Because what's happened is, I mean, I'm just thinking about the last, I always look big picture, so you got to excuse me. But when I ask myself systemically, how did we get here? You know, how did we get to the state that we're in, where every movie, every song, because my grandparents didn't grow up with every movie and every song from the time you're a little kid being about this knight in shining armor coming and grasping you up and rescuing you from all this. And now kids are growing up where it's very normal on every TV station and every show and every movie that you just hook up immediately, physically. Yeah. And if it doesn't work, well, that's okay. Yeah. Sometimes things don't work out. Sure. So you just go find the next one. It wasn't the right one for you. So we've gotten so far away from anything that actually is grounded in right and wrong, and black and white, and truth.
I want to jump a whole direction there. One of the problems when you grow up in a broken culture, and what did I say? Much of our love operates out of deficit. So if I don't have parents who love me, if I've got this hole in me, I've got this hole in my self-worth, what I believe is supposed to happen, first of all, God created that sexual desire very strong. And what I laughingly say is men and women are very different. And so if there wasn't sexual desire, if there wasn't something that pulled us back together,
the human race would have died out.
The human race would have died out. We would not be together. So, I mean, in the overarching picture, it needed to be there. And no, it's not dirty and it's not wrong, et cetera. But what's missing goes back to that deficit piece. What's missing is it's self-worth that gives us the ability to develop self-control. Well, lacking self-worth, what have we done? We've used shaming. We've come along and said, it's, sex is dirty, it's shameful, etc. We've tied it to shame at such a high level, and guess what? Shame doesn't work, because shame destroys your self-worth, and self-worth is the piece that when that's in place, now I'm willing to commit. Now I'm willing to look at the bigger picture. Now I'm willing to slow this process down and to delay gratification. I'm willing to do all of those things if I see in the bigger picture that, if I slow this down, if I commit, if I walk through this process, if I operate in self-control, I'll have something better later. But we don't believe that. We're operating out of a deficit situation, which means that we're desperate, we're without hope. So then parents are throwing shame, churches are throwing that control, they're throwing everything around. That didn't work. As a church, we realized that didn't work. So then it's like, let's just take it all off and let's just have no rules. That's not working. Because now we're just like utterly destroyed as a society. And I'm going to take it back to that deficit piece. When you try to operate in love and you haven't got that inner part of you filled up, we have a real problem. Houston, this mission is not going to work. And no amount of legalism, no amount of rules, no amount of shaming, no amount of controlling, it's not going to go there. And what we don't realize is it really does come back to that deep spiritual dynamic. Worth ultimately can only be activated by the presence of God, the love of God, the life of God. And until we learn how to do that better, this whole sexual area, this whole romantic love area is going to continue to go psycho, because until I'm able to give you hope that, hey, if you'll walk this out, you'll feel better about yourself. You'll be able to have some self-control. etc. If I can't give you hope in that area, why wouldn't you go psycho in the sexual area? Because it's as good as it gets.
Yeah. That is really powerful. And I'm thinking about the fact that if I can reconstruct the thought I had in my brain a minute ago, that what'd you say about the deficit, and part of that, the deficit breaks families down, and the breaking down of families increases the deficit. Because, it's really interesting how sociology kind of gets a bad rap in terms of being unchristian, and part of it, can certainly tend that way. But over and over, the psychological studies show, for instance, how important family is, how important it is to have a mom and a dad. And I just read recently about, I think it was in Mississippi, that there's thousands of men in prison, and almost all of them didn't have fathers, and so a young man that grows up without a stable home life is in deficit, because they haven't. God made us to grow up in a safe environment where my needs are met, and we still have problems trusting in God, but if somebody grows up in a real deep deficit because, doesn't have a dad, doesn't have a mom, can't trust anybody, is abused, is abandoned, is beaten, is downtrodden, all those things, then they're going to be in greater deficit and less able to trust in God. In fact, I think it was Paul Vitz wrote a book a number of years ago about famous atheists, and every one of them that he wrote about had a horrible relationship with his father, and some of them even made that connection between their father and their lack of faith in God. So the deficit creates, or the breakdown in family life exacerbates the deficit in people's lives, and just keeps contributing. It's a snowball.
I believe that people see, think, feel from inside of where they are spiritually. And as I talk about in the step-by-step series, and encourage you, hey, get online, check it out. On the YouTube, you can check that out. The step-by-step series talks about this spiritual development. And it is interesting. You are dealing with it from a sociology standpoint, but you said virtually every one of the things. It starts with safe. What's one of the deepest drivers in us? We want to be able to stay alive.
Yeah.
So if safe isn't met, nothing else is going to happen. What's the second deepest thing? I want to live meaningful. I want to live well. Well, as spiritual beings, connection is huge. Relationship is huge. So if I don't have that piece in order, and then I go into covering. Covering is where I develop trust. Well, if I don't have a father in place, what happens, and I don't understand why it happens, but you study the sociology, you study the implications. Yeah. There is a huge correlation between self-worth and the relationship with the father and what the father speaks. And again, women frequently resent this. Well, what am I, chopped liver? And the only answer I can come up with, mothers are so more consistently loving, and you'll occasionally hear someone say this, well, of course she loves me. She's my mother.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, well, yeah, mom sewed that into me, but that doesn't seem to pick up the worth in the same level. Dads are more likely to be off in their own world, off conquering their own stuff. So if dad stops and loves the kids, it's all of a sudden like, oh, all of a sudden there's some self-worth being poured in there. Now I'm not operating from that deficit place. Now I'm going to be much less vulnerable to that person who's a shyster, who's going to come in and who is really going to just try to take advantage of me, and he's going to prey on that part. And he's going to prey on that part probably because he's in deficit too. He's over here, he's needing someone to respond to him at this, oh, you're practically a god, you're wonderful, you're the solution. He's over here in deficit. And so you get these two people who are in that. Yeah. That's who's vulnerable to romantic love. The people who are really vulnerable to romantic love are people who are in this deep deficit, which means from the very beginning, you have the absolute requirements. You have almost a mandate that this thing is going to totally blow up.
That's sad, isn't it?
It's very sad.
I shouldn't laugh. Yeah.
But that's where we have. And then I come back to really, in order to fix this whole situation, it really does go back to self-worth. And one of the biggest pieces is spiritual. You see, think, feel from inside of where you are spiritually. I know in my struggle, I wrote in Dead Dogs, I wrote about a generational struggle of what I call the chip on the shoulder, where it's like, wow, I need to be seen. I need to be heard. How come you can't see me? How come you can't hear me? And that's a generational struggle in our family. Well, it's interesting. Do you recall what I said about my wife? One of the things that got me offended. Well, how was my sermon, dear? Oh, fine. What? I'm going to hurt you, you know? I mean, I'm preaching. I'm a pastor. I have success at I don't know how many levels. I shouldn't need that validation. Mm-hmm. And yet I'm still looking at her going, you need to validate this area. And if you don't validate this area, we're going to have a problem in our marriage. Think about that. Even I don't have any of those complaints. I should be fine. I should be healthy. And yet the very illustrations that I shared, when I'm sitting down wanting to talk about my great ideas, and she's like, not interested. How about if we talk relational stuff? I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? But even my responses, despite the fact that I would have to say that I've had people so into me, I'm not operating from the level of deficit that many people are in that area. Mm-hmm. There's still this deep cry within me for validation.
Yeah. I hear you, and I think that is something that every single one of us has a need for and always have. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that it's something that God has placed within us so that we seek him, and that we spend a lot of time seeking everything else besides that, besides my worth being found in him, and the fact that he created me, and the fact that he called me, and the fact that he loves me, and the fact that he died for me, and the fact that he gives me his Holy Spirit to be with me at all times and guide me. Because I'm just thinking, about my generation, which we've had nothing but self-worth poured into us. It has been all about trophies and self-help, and you're worthy and you're great. And I've been hearing that constantly, but guess what? It doesn't add up.
That's right.
It cannot fill what only God can fill,
that's right.
Whoever it's coming from. I had a dad who was very much about praising how well I did at things. Now, it was very performance oriented, that's for sure. But it was also about, like, you're so precocious, you're so smart, you're so, like all of these things. He tried, but there was a place inside of me that there still is, that is God's spot. Nobody else is going to be able to fill that.
That's right.
And so I hear what you're saying. I think that ever since the advent of modern psychology, and therapy, this is what we've been trying to do. That's why there's so many books out there about how to raise confident kids, how to, people are trying to do that, but the puzzle piece that we're given, it doesn't fit. And for me, that really is the issue with me in love in all relationships, is that I'm constantly looking for that to come horizontally, what can only come vertically. That's why in that same Matthew 6 that you're talking about, he says, you cannot love both God and mammon, which is God and possessions. And that's how we look at it. You're mine. You're mine, so you treat me this way. I'm yours, so you treat me this way. We can't love both. We either choose one and despise the other. That's, he puts it pretty plainly there. So, for me, I think all of those safety things and, all of the step-by-step is very valid. But when I watch that, I'm like, well, what about me? Because I didn't get any of that. And now I'm an adult who has no idea how to grow up again. Where am I supposed to have all these layers? And the answer is, you're reborn. You're reborn through the power of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And you get to grow up again.
Right.
In Christ. And all of those layers come through him.
I coined the term spiritual substance because there is a look-alike at the soulish level that doesn't have the depth and have the power to transform. And the look-alike are the trophies. The look-alike is the human praise. But there is something deeper in terms of validation that where God and people, I believe it's both, are able to see a deeper level, and they're able to look inside of your heart, and they see the God-created person, and they start speaking to that, and they start affirming that. And then there's another step beyond that. There is that step where when you manifest something really ugly, because what happens, we all see our sin nature. So it's like, okay, the God part starts showing up, and it's like I get excited, and hey, maybe I do have a purpose, and maybe I'm getting there, and then all of a sudden the ugly stuff shows back up again. What's even more significant and powerful is when you have a human source, or sometimes the voice of God is enough, that's able to still validate you when that ugly stuff is showing up. And when all of a sudden you're able to receive that acceptance, that love, that validation, and it's deep enough that it hits that spiritual fabric. It doesn't just live at the soul level, and we're not going to have time to flesh that one out the way I would like to. But it doesn't just live at the soul level, which is the ego, which is me feeling good about myself on a very temporary basis. There's a deeper, Hebrews 11:1. Now, faith is the substance. There's a deeper self-worth than the self-worth that we give when we say, oh, good job, and we validate performance. There's a deeper self-worth where we speak to people and we speak into their lives of, this is who God created you to be. And they hear it, and they believe it, and there's a validation, and it awakens calling, it awakens mission, it awakens a willingness to sacrifice, a willingness to lay down my life. There's an entire dynamic there that I feel like our culture is absolutely missing across the board. Obviously, there's exceptions. There's people here and there. But when we get that awakened in us, it's not what you were talking about. It's not the, hey, and if that hasn't been awakened in you, it's virtually impossible to turn around and awaken it in somebody else around you.
We were talking the other day about Maslow, Abraham Maslow, and his hierarchy of needs. I'm not sure I can remember all of them. And you were using different terminology, I think, in your talking about covering or something.
Well,
I'm not sure all that you were talking about there.
The first two, actually, it's funny because I was walking through, I was using the combination of developmental psychology and et cetera, and I was looking for language, and it'd been 20 years since I'd studied. And I end up, oh, wow, I chose the same two words on the first two layers. Now, beyond that, they don't look anything alike. But the first layer of safe and belonging is the exact same language as Maslow.
Well, the three of them are love, belonging, and self-actualization. And, of course, self-actualization sounds very humanistic, but bear with me. When Jesus was baptized, wasn't it? He heard this voice saying from heaven, "This is my Son, whom I love. In him I am well pleased." And you think about that in terms of belonging. This is my Son, whom I love. There's two of them right there, of Maslow. And Jesus, I think, I don't know, Jesus, wasn't it then that Jesus said, this voice is for your sake and not for mine?
Yes.
But Jesus, he knew God's love was so deep for him. He knew he was God's Son, that he was able to, for lack of a better term, be self-actualized. I don't really like that term, but what it means to me is that he was free to do God's will rather than caring what other people wanted him to do.
Think about that, though. He hadn't even started his ministry.
Yeah.
So the validation comes before he even takes the first step in ministry. I mean, that right there.
Yeah.
And I agree with you.
That's pretty powerful.
The self-actualization, I think it's better visualized instead of that. The self-actualization, it's almost like I have to walk through this, and as I'm walking through this, there's a validation. When it really comes from God, it's exactly what I was just saying. God awakens it. God speaks to it. There's a belief system in self. And again, it's not in self. If you've been around me at all, John 15 is over and over again, apart from God, we can do nothing. But there's an awakening of, if I will walk with God, if I will partner with God, if I will wake up the grace of God in my life, then I can live in a place that has purpose. I can live in a place that has meaning. When we put all those factors together, then again, I'm with you. I hate the term self-actualization, but it's not that far from this worth piece that I've been talking about.
Oh, absolutely.
And when you're talking about worth, what do? We call it self-worth. So what's the difference between self-worth and self-actualization? Right. But that's where I say there's a substance.
It's the fact that we're worth something because God made us to be worth something. And it's really about God. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's really about God, not us. And the same with the self-actualization. I think it's the freedom to find, and you've talked about this, the freedom to be what God made us to be, instead of being slaves to the world and to our bodily desires and all the rest.
When people touch our lives and they're sowing into us, and let's go back that last level, commitment. You've got someone who has worth, who has been awakened. People who are awakened then have a power to speak into the lives of other people. And when we've got that in our lives and someone's speaking in and they're sowing in, then I'm able to walk in this more disciplined manner where I'm willing to commit, and I have long-term relationships. I have long-term relationships because you can treat me badly. I have the grace of God. I can love you through that. When I love you through that, you become a different person. When you become a different person, you become a qualified friend all over again, even though you might not have been a qualified friend when you treated me badly. Many times you can love people through that, and they become actualized, if you will. I mean, it's such a different vision than the romantic vision, which is you need to be this to me, and you need to meet my expectations, and you need to keep my feelings in a good place. That is a pathway of destruction it can't have good outcomes.
God help us.
It literally can't have good outcomes, and that's what our culture is almost 100% bought into. Well, I hope we've challenged your thinking. As always, we wandered around a little bit. We start and we bounce off from one another and have a good time. But I hope it's challenged you, because the basis of love in our culture is much more that, are you meeting my needs? Am I meeting your needs? And that's just not as deep. It's not as rich. It's not as full. And there is a much deeper love that Christ has for us when he loved us when we kind of treated him badly, you could say. He loved us when we absolutely didn't deserve that love. And he declared us to be worthy of his sacrifice, even though he was taking a risk, because maybe we would respond to that and maybe we wouldn't respond to that. That's what, when you have that worth, when you have that mission, when you have that calling of God inside, we then are willing to lay down our lives for the people around us. That's biblical love. And I challenge you to step into that kind of lifestyle and be a blessing to the people around you. Again, like it, pass it on. We thank you for helping us expand the ministry, and thank you for joining us in Heart Change You.